Mark had always loved mornings by the lake. The gentle ripple of water against the shore, the soft call of distant birds, and the way the sunrise painted gold streaks across the calm surface. It was his sanctuary. Every summer for the past decade, he had spent hours on his dock, fishing, reading, or simply staring out at the horizon, letting the world's noise fade away. But this morning was different. Mark's heart sank the moment he pulled into the Marina parking lot. The spot where his dock should have been was empty. Not a single plank or post remained where his familiar wooden dock had stood for years. Just open water, lapping quietly against the pilings of neighboring docks. Impossible, he muttered. Stepping out of his truck with growing disbelief, he looked around, half expecting someone to call out a prank or explain the disappearance. But the marina was eerily silent. A few early risers moved about on other docks, but no one paid him any attention. Mark's gaze darted across the marina, searching for any sign of his dock or a clue as to what had happened. His boots splashed lightly through the damp sand as he hurried toward the marina office. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, a faint murmur of voices echoed. Mark pushed the door open wider and spotted Linda, the HOA president, seated at her desk, talking quietly on the phone. "Linda," Mark said, his voice tight. "What happened?" "To my dock." She ended the call and turned. A practiced smile plastered on her face. "Good morning, Mark. I was just finalizing some community updates. About your dock. It's been reassigned." "Reassigned?" Mark echoed, incredulous. "You mean you took it?" Linda's smile didn't waver. "It's not personal. The marina's undergoing some changes to better accommodate everyone. The board decided some docks needed reallocation for community benefit. Yours was reassigned to me temporarily. But don't worry, you'll get a spot again." Mark felt his chest tighten. "Why wasn't I told? And why my dock? It's all in the meeting minutes. You can check them. Anytime." She stood up, smooth and unbothered. "We're working on a bigger plan. I'm sure you'll see the benefits soon." But Mark wasn't reassured. Something about Linda's calm tone felt wrong, almost rehearsed. He could see in her eyes she was hiding more than she let on. Walking back to the empty spot where his dock once stood, Mark's mind raced. Had Linda really taken it for community needs? Or was there something more sinister at play? He had seen her at HOA meetings, always eager to push her own agenda. But stealing docks, that crossed a line. Mark pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to a few neighbors. Anyone else notice changes at the marina? Docks missing. As replies trickled in, a pattern emerged. Several docks had been reassigned without notice, and some neighbors whispered about Linda's growing power, but no one wanted to talk openly. Afraid of retaliation, the quiet lakeside community Mark loved suddenly felt like a battleground. As he stood there, the sun climbing higher, Mark realized, this was just the beginning. He wasn't going to let the dock disappear quietly. Something bigger was brewing, and he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Mark didn't sleep much that night. The empty space where his dock had stood gnawed at him like an open wound. He kept replaying his conversation with Linda, her smooth smile, the vague community needs, and the cold certainty in her voice. It didn't add up. Something was rotten beneath the surface. Determined to get answers, Mark spent the next morning scouring the HOA's official website and the community bulletin board for any updates or announcements about marina changes. Nothing mentioned dock reassignments or community improvements, just the usual reminders about trash pickup and upcoming social events. Frustrated but not deterred, Mark decided to dig deeper. He remembered that HOA board meetings were supposed to be open to residents, but attendance was low, and minutes were often vague. Maybe if he attended one in person, he could catch something missed. Later that week, Mark showed up at the HOA clubhouse, early, just as the meeting was about to start. The room was small and cramped, filled with a dozen familiar faces, mostly retirees and a few younger families. Linda sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other board members, her presence commanding. Mark took a seat near the back, keeping his expression neutral. As the meeting began, Linda spoke confidently about upcoming projects, landscaping, a new playground, and most importantly, Marina improvements. She talked about maximizing resources and fair distribution, phrases that sounded official, but vague. When the topic shifted to the Marina, Mark's ears perked up. Linda outlined plans to reorganize dock assignments and enhance revenue streams by offering premium spots to residents willing to pay more. She mentioned market-driven allocations and priority access for active contributors. Mark's heart sank. It sounded less like community spirit and more like a cash grab. Had Linda been quietly selling or reallocating docks to benefit herself or a select few? After the meeting, Mark lingered outside, watching as Linda chatted with a small group in hushed tones. Curious, he edged closer and overheard snippets of conversation about exclusive leases and developer interest. His suspicion deepened. Linda wasn't just reallocating docks. She was building a private empire under the guise of community improvement. That evening, Mark's phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number read, "Be careful digging. Too deep. Some things are better left alone." Chills ran down his spine. Was someone watching him? Despite the warning, Mark refused to back down. He reached out to his neighbor, Carol, an elderly woman who'd lived in the community for decades and was known for her sharp memory and quiet wisdom. Over coffee, Carol revealed stories Mark hadn't heard, how Linda's family had gained control of several key properties around the lake, and how neighbors who questioned her were subtly ostracized or pressured to sell. "She's playing a long game," Carol said, her voice low. "The docks are just the beginning." Mark left Carol's house with a new sense of urgency. This wasn't just about his dock. It was about a creeping takeover, masked by smiles and community meetings. Determined to find proof, Mark started examining HOA emails and documents he could access, filing formal requests and sifting through paperwork. Late into the night, he uncovered something alarming. A set of emails between Linda and a local developer discussing marina upgrades, premium dock sales, and exclusive access rights. One email stood out. Linda promised to secure prime docks for the developer's use, bypassing the usual approval process. The implications hit Mark like a punch. The marina was being privatized behind residents' backs. He realized this was more than a personal loss. Linda was weaponizing her position to profit and consolidate power, sacrificing the community's trust and traditions. Mark's resolve hardened. He had to expose the truth before it was too late. But he knew he was walking a dangerous path, one where allies might be few and threats could be real. As he stared out over the water, the empty spot where his dock had stood felt like a silent challenge. Reclaim what was lost, or lose everything. Mark's days blurred into nights as he plunged deeper into the tangled web of the HOA's secrets. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Linda's reach was far wider than anyone suspected. But with every new piece of evidence, the risks grew heavier. He started by quietly speaking with neighbors, testing the waters. Most were reluctant, casting nervous glances over their shoulders before whispering of sudden dock reassignments, unexplained fees, and a creeping atmosphere of fear. A few recalled subtle threats, veiled warnings to stay in line, or face fines and legal headaches. "I don't want any trouble," said Mrs. Jensen, a retired school teacher who'd lived by the lake for nearly 40 years. But Linda's been changing the rules overnight. "Last month, she told me my dock was under review and hinted I might have to give it up. It's unsettling." Mark listened carefully, noting the pattern. Docks were disappearing, quietly reassigned, or simply fenced off. Those who resisted faced escalating pressure, fines, loss of privileges, and social isolation within the community. Worse, Mark discovered documents that suggested Linda had forged signatures and altered meeting minutes to cover her tracks. The HOA's transparency was an illusion. The real decisions happened behind closed doors, without input or consent. One afternoon, while sifting through old HOA files in the clubhouse office, under the pretense of catching up on community news, Mark's heart raced when he found a folder labeled Marina Contracts. Inside were copies of agreements between the HOA and a local development company. Contracts never presented to the full board or the residents. One contract was particularly damning. It outlined a deal granting the developer exclusive rights to several prime docks for luxury rentals, bypassing any community vote. The price? A hefty kickback to Linda and a few board members, disguised as consulting fees. Mark's hands trembled as he read. Linda wasn't just stealing docks. She was running a secret scheme that would transform the marina into a private playground for the wealthy, forcing longtime residents like him out of their cherished spaces. But it wasn't just greed. Mark began noticing subtle signs that Linda's power was maintained through intimidation. Late one evening, as he left a neighbor's house, he noticed a car slowly following him down the quiet streets. When he stopped at a stop sign, the car pulled alongside, the driver staring coldly before speeding off. Fear gripped him, but he pushed it down. If he backed off now, Linda would win. He had to press on. He also discovered that Linda had a network of loyalists within the HOA, people rewarded with better docks, lower fees, or social favor, all in exchange for silence and complicity. The community was fractured, manipulated into submission. One of these loyalists was Jason, a younger board member who had once been friendly to Mark. When Mark confronted him about the dock theft, Jason brushed it off, warning Mark not to stir. Trouble. "You don't want to make enemies, Mark," he said quietly. Linda's got eyes everywhere. Mark realized that to fight Linda, he needed allies. But trust was scarce, and betrayal lurked around every corner. Despite the threats, Mark's resolve only grew stronger. He secretly recorded conversations when possible, carefully backing up documents and messages. He knew that exposing Linda's web of deceit required undeniable proof, but the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. Anonymous messages continued to arrive, threats thinly veiled as friendly advice, strange noises outside his house at night, tires crunching gravel in the dark. Mark's peaceful lakeside life was shattered, replaced by a high-stakes game, where every move could trigger retaliation. Yet, as he sat by the water one evening, the sun dipping below the trees, Mark felt a fierce determination burning inside him. This was no longer just about a stolen dock. It was about reclaiming the soul of the community before it disappeared forever, and he was ready to risk everything. The night air was thick with fog as Mark crept toward the Marina clubhouse, heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was about to find inside, but he knew it would be a turning point. The sense of danger had been building for weeks, and tonight he was ready to confront the shadowy side of the HOA's power. No matter the cost, he had heard rumors of a secret meeting, a late-night gathering where Linda and her closest allies plotted the future of the Marina behind locked doors. The official HOA meetings were a facade. Mark had learned. The real decisions were made in the shadows, away from prying eyes. Slipping through the back entrance, Mark paused just inside the dimly lit clubhouse. Voices echoed softly from the conference room ahead. He crouched low and pressed his ear to the doorframe. Priority leases must be locked in before the developer moves in. Linda's voice was crisp, confident, almost ruthless. "We can't afford any leaks," another voice whispered back. "The residents can't know about the privatization plans until it's too late." Mark's blood ran cold. They were planning to sell off the docks, his dock, without the community's knowledge. The implications were devastating. If the Marina became a private enclave for wealthy outsiders, long-time residents would be shut out, their lakeside lives destroyed. He inched closer, careful not to make a sound. "We should start fencing off sections by next month," Linda continued. "By the time they realize, it'll be irreversible." Mark's grip tightened around his phone. He switched on the recorder app, capturing every word. This was the proof he needed. Suddenly, a chair scraped against the floor. "Who's there?" Linda's sharp voice cut through the room like a blade. Mark froze. Panic surged as footsteps approached the door. He ducked behind a stack of folding chairs, heart hammering in his ribs. The door handle jiggled, then stopped. Footsteps receded slowly. He waited a full minute before daring to move. Heart still racing, clutching his phone, Mark slipped out of the clubhouse and melted into the shadows. But as he made his way back to his truck, a dark sedan idled just beyond the Marina gate. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a pair of cold eyes. "Going somewhere, Mark?" A voice called out, low and threatening. He didn't wait for an invitation. With adrenaline fueling his legs, he sprinted toward the parking lot. The sedan's engine roaring to life behind him. Tires spun on gravel, chasing him in the dark. Mark didn't look back until he reached his truck. Fumbling with the keys, the sedan screeched to a halt a few yards away. But then, as if reconsidering, it peeled out and vanished into the night. Breathing hard, Mark slammed the door shut and locked it. His mind raced. Linda's reach was deeper and more dangerous than he'd imagined. She had eyes everywhere, and now he was marked. The recording in his pocket was a lifeline, a weapon against the corruption strangling his community. But he knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. If he was going to take down Linda's scheme, he needed allies who could help expose the truth without fear. The next morning, Mark reached out cautiously to Carol and a few trusted neighbors, sharing what he'd recorded. Their reactions were a mix of shock and fear, but also fierce determination. "We can't let this happen," Carol whispered. "But we have to be smart." Linda plays dirty. Together, they began planning discreetly, gathering more evidence, documenting abuses, and rallying support. The tension in the community grew palpable. A quiet storm building beneath the surface. Mark knew this fight was far from over. Linda's shadow loomed large, but the light of resistance was flickering and growing stronger. As he looked out over the Marina that evening, the water shimmering under the moonlight, Mark felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The war for the Marina had begun. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly that morning. Texts, missed calls, and cryptic warnings. But he had a plan, and he was ready to push forward. The Marina was more than a collection of docks. It was the heart of the community. If Linda's scheme succeeded, everything would be lost. It was time to take the fight beyond whispers and shadowy meetings. His target, the local environmental regulatory agency, Mark had learned through his late-night investigations that Linda's privatization plans included expanding marina facilities illegally, encroaching on protected shoreline areas without permits. If he could expose these violations, he might trigger an official investigation and perhaps a temporary shutdown of the entire marina. It was a gamble. The backlash could be swift and brutal, but Mark had no choice. The dock theft was personal, but this was bigger. It was a fight for the community's future. Mark spent hours compiling evidence, photos of unauthorized construction, copies of forged documents, recordings from the secret meeting, and detailed notes from neighbors. His hands trembled slightly as he uploaded the files to the agency's online complaint system. Within days, inspectors arrived at the marina, their presence sending shockwaves through the community. Notices were posted, declaring parts of the marina under investigation and warning that operations might be temporarily suspended pending compliance reviews. The news spread quickly. Some residents cheered quietly, grateful for action. Others feared losing access to their boats and docks, unaware of Linda's role in sparking the crisis. Linda, however, was furious. Mark caught wind of a closed-door emergency HOA meeting where Linda lashed out, accusing him of sabotaging the community. "He's a troublemaker," she declared, her voice icy. "We'll expose him and ruin his reputation." True to her word, Linda launched a calculated smear campaign. Flyers appeared overnight, calling Mark a disruptive agitator and warning neighbors to beware his reckless tactics. Social media posts spread rumors, and trusted friends began to distance themselves, fearing fallout. Mark's phone buzzed with anonymous threats. "Drop it, or you'll regret it." His mailbox was filled with hostile letters. His once peaceful life had become a battlefield. Yet amid the chaos, unexpected allies emerged. A small but growing group of neighbors, quietly outraged by Linda's betrayal, began to meet in secret. They shared their own stories of dock reassignment, intimidation, and fines, victims of Linda's growing grip. Carol, steadfast and wise, became a pillar of the resistance, encouraging neighbors to stand firm and document every incident. Together, they began building a case for community reform. Still, Mark knew this was a delicate balance. The marina's partial shutdown meant lost income for local businesses and strained relations among residents. The stakes were high, and any misstep could fracture the fragile alliance. Late one evening, as Mark reviewed documents in his living room, a sudden knock at the door startled him. Opening it cautiously, he found a man in a dark jacket. Jason, the young board member who had warned him earlier. "I want to help," Jason said quietly, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Linda's crossed a line. There are more people tired of her control than you think." Mark hesitated, but nodded. This was the break he needed. A potential insider willing to risk it all. Together, they planned the next moves. Gathering more evidence, preparing for upcoming HOA votes, and reaching out to local journalists. The tension was electric, the danger real. Mark's world had shrunk to a relentless fight. But with every step, he felt the tide beginning to turn. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark stood by the water's edge, staring at the empty space where his dock once stood. The marina was quiet now, but the battle for its soul was only just beginning. Mark had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning in his favor. With Jason secretly feeding him information and a small coalition of neighbors rallying behind the cause, hope flickered in the darkness that had settled over the community. But power, Mark knew, often came with a price. And sometimes, that price was betrayal. One afternoon, as Mark pored over documents in his cluttered home office, His phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering, wary, but curious. "Mark!" A voice whispered urgently on the other end. "It's Jason. We need to talk. In person. Now." Mark felt a flicker of relief. Maybe Jason had something new. A breakthrough that could finally expose Linda. They agreed to meet at a quiet coffee shop, halfway between the marina and town. Mark arrived early, nerves jangling as he scanned the room. Finally, Jason slipped in, glancing nervously around, before sliding into the seat opposite him. "I'm sorry I haven't been in touch more," Jason began. "Things have gotten complicated." Mark leaned forward, eager. "What's going on? Do you have more info?" Jason swallowed hard. "I do, but it's worse than we thought. Linda's not just running the show. She's got people in the town council, in the local police. They're protecting her." Mark's stomach tightened. Corruption that deep meant the fight wasn't just local. It was systemic. "Jason, what can we do?" Mark asked, voice low. Jason hesitated, then sighed. "That's the problem. I'm not sure I can help anymore. I've been getting pressure, threats. My family's being watched." Mark's hope dimmed, but he nodded, understanding. "I have one more thing," Jason added, voice trembling. "There's a leak. Someone's been feeding Linda everything. We've been planning." Mark's blood ran cold. Betrayal within their ranks. "Who?" Mark demanded, heart pounding. Jason shook his head. "I don't know, but you have to be careful." "I'm sorry, Mark." "I have to step back." Before Mark could respond, Jason's phone buzzed violently. He glanced at it and paled. "I have to go. Stay safe." Jason slipped out, leaving Mark alone. With a storm of thoughts, that night, Mark barely slept. His phone's glowing screen revealed another anonymous message. "You're on your own now." The next morning brought more bad news. A flyer appeared on Mark's doorstep, accusing him of trespassing and threatening legal action if he didn't cease his harassment of HOA board members. Neighbors who had once shown support suddenly avoided his gaze. The isolation was crushing, but the most painful blow came when Mark received a call from Carol. "Mark," she said, voice tight with emotion. "I've been warned too. Linda's tightening her grip. We need to rethink our approach." Mark knew she was right. The betrayal had shaken their fragile alliance, but giving up was not an option. He doubled down, reaching out to a local investigative journalist, hoping to break the story wide open. Together, they arranged a secret meeting to share his trove of evidence. As Mark prepared for the meeting, he glanced one last time at the empty marina, the water shimmering innocently under the morning sun. The fight was far from over. If anything, the stakes had grown even higher. Linda's web of deceit was closing in, but Mark was determined to unravel it, even if it meant standing alone in the darkest storm. Mark arrived at the rundown diner on the edge of town just before dawn, the chill in the air matching the knot tightening in his stomach. This meeting could change everything, or shatter what little remained of his fight. The investigative journalist, Elena, was already seated at a corner booth, her laptop open and eyes sharp, scanning the documents Mark had brought. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. "I've been digging on Linda and the HOA for weeks. What you have could blow this wide open." Mark nodded, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I want the truth out there, but I'm afraid of what comes next." Elena smiled faintly. "Truth has a way of shaking things loose. But yes, it's going to get messy." Together, they reviewed the evidence, the forged contracts, recorded meetings, the environmental violations, the intimidation tactics. Elena's fingers flew over the keyboard, cross-referencing names and dates. "This isn't just a local HOA scandal," she murmured. "This is corruption that reaches into the town's government and police. If we publish, there'll be repercussions." Mark swallowed hard. "I'm ready. The community deserves to know." Before they could finalize the story, Mark's phone buzzed violently. A text from an unknown number read, "Stop this now, or the marina will be closed permanently. A threat or a promise." Elena frowned. "Looks like they're trying to scare you off." Mark's resolve hardened. Let them try. That afternoon, as the first rays of sun spilled over the marina, Linda appeared in front of Mark's house, flanked by two burly men. Her smile was cold, eyes glinting with menace. "Mark," she said smoothly, "this ends today. Drop your crusade, or you'll lose everything. Your dock, your home, your reputation." Mark stood his ground. "I'm not afraid of you." Linda's smile twisted. "You should be." She turned and walked away, the men following like shadows. That evening, Mark joined Carol and the others at a secret meeting in Carol's basement. The tension was thick. "We can't back down now," Mark said. "Linda's threats show she's scared, but she's dangerous." Carol nodded, her eyes steely. "We need more people on our side. The more residents who speak out, the harder it is for her to silence us." They devised a plan to hold an emergency community meeting, inviting residents to hear the truth and vote on removing Linda and the board members complicit in the scheme. As the meeting day approached, Mark's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. "We're watching. One wrong move, and the marina's gates close for good." The stakes had never been higher. On the night of the meeting, the community center filled with anxious neighbors. Their whispers a mix of fear and hope. Linda took the stage, her usual confident facade flickering under the weight of mounting accusations. Mark stood in the crowd, watching as residents demanded answers, some shaking with anger, others with fear. When the votes were tallied, a majority supported a motion to call for an external audit and suspend the current board's powers, pending investigation. Linda's face hardened. "This isn't over," she hissed. As the meeting dispersed, Mark noticed Jason watching from the back, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Mark saw a flicker of regret. Outside, the marina was silent, but the battle was far from finished. Mark knew the coming days would be the hardest yet. Linda had power, resources, and a ruthless determination to keep control. But now, the community was awake and ready to fight. As Mark walked toward the water, the empty dock space no longer felt like a loss, but a symbol, a challenge to reclaim what was stolen, and a promise that he wouldn't stop until justice was served. The night before the final HOA board vote was thick with tension. Mark sat by the water's edge, the cool breeze rippling the lake's surface. His thoughts tangled with everything that had happened. This was it. The moment to reclaim the marina, the docks, and the community's trust. But deep down, he knew Linda wouldn't go quietly. The community center was packed the next evening. Faces both familiar and unfamiliar filled the room. Neighbors who had once turned away now whispered in hesitant support. Drawn by the growing truth, the air buzzed. With anticipation, fear, and a fierce hope, Linda entered, her usual confident stride slightly faltering under the weight of scrutiny. Her allies sat stiffly behind her, their eyes darting nervously. Mark took his place among the residents, feeling the silent strength of the crowd behind him. The meeting began with a tense silence, broken only by the chairperson's call to order. Mark watched as evidence was presented. Recordings, forged documents, and the mounting proof of Linda's corruption. The community's outrage grew, voices rising in demand for change. Linda fought back fiercely. denying accusations, spinning lies, and trying to rally her supporters. But the tide had turned. More neighbors stood, sharing their own stories of intimidation and loss. The room pulsed with a growing wave of unity. When the vote was finally called, the room held its breath, one by one, hands raised to remove Linda and her corrupt board members from power. The majority was overwhelming. As the decision was announced, Linda's face drained of color. She stood abruptly, eyes flashing. "This isn't over," she spat, voice cold and low. "You think you've won? You've only just begun a war you can't control." Before anyone could react, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, then stiffened. Mark's heart skipped when Linda turned back to the crowd. "I have one last surprise." The room tensed, curiosity sharpening. Linda pulled out a folder, waving it like a weapon. "I have proof," she said, voice dripping with venom, "that someone in this room has been orchestrating sabotage and leaking information to the press." Eyes flicked nervously across the crowd. Mark's stomach churned. Linda's gaze locked onto Jason, who had remained silent in the back. "You!" Linda hissed. "You betrayed us all." Jason swallowed hard, face pale. "It's not true," Linda smirked. "Oh, but it is, and I have the evidence to prove it." She tossed the folder on the table. Photos, messages, recordings. Carefully edited and out of context. A trap. Before Linda could continue, Mark stepped forward, calm but resolute. "Those evidences are doctored," he said firmly. "And we have real proof. Your illegal deals, forged documents, and intimidation tactics." Elena, the journalist, stood beside him, holding out a USB drive. "We've exposed everything." The room erupted in murmurs. Linda's plan to flip. The tables had failed. In the chaos, police officers quietly entered the room. Earlier tips from Mark and Elena had triggered an investigation, and now officers moved to arrest Linda on charges of fraud and corruption. Linda's face twisted in rage and disbelief as she was led away, shouting curses. Jason approached Mark, quietly. "I'm sorry for the betrayal, Mark. I was scared, trapped. But I want to make things right." Mark nodded, a weary relief washing over him. "We'll rebuild this community, together." Weeks later, the marina buzzed with new life. Docks were restored, access returned, and the community, once fractured, began to heal. Mark stood on his dock again, the water calm beneath the stars, a symbol of resilience and hope. But as he looked toward the dark horizon, a chill ran down his spine. In the shadows beyond the marina, a figure watched silently. The fight for the marina was won, but the war for its soul might never truly end.